welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. This is Hiko Simon, and this is my new microphone. Actually, I've just realized I have to make sure that the white balance is fixed, because if it goes on auto, it goes all the colors of the rainbow during the broadcast. And okay, so now I'm really red. Let's lower the white balance a bit. See, that's nice. Let's do that. Boom, boom. Yeah, I'll take that. Hey everybody, welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. My name is Hiko Simon. I now have a Yeti microphone that arrived yesterday, so I am trying this out. I'm going to probably lower that a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of exciting. It's good. There aren't actually many topics tonight, but as you know, although I think it might not take a long time, it often does. I do have the keyboard over here if we do have some extra time to do that. How is the sound? JMac217 says it sounds great. I hope so, because, you know, yeah, for a long time I've been using, well, actually until now, I've been using this fella, the Samsung, what do they call this? The Samsung mic. It's a good little mic, but I did become aware that, one, it was picking up a lot of the sound from the PC, and, you know, and it was far away and it was small, so hopefully this makes it a lot better. Time for ASMR. Well... Yes, indeed. You can see no boom, says Mr. Cordy Chap. Oh, there is a boom, actually. Well, it's kind of a boom. I can hang it upside down, but this seemed to make the most sense for now. I could put it the other way around. Reload. Okay, I'll say boom again. Boom. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. Tokyo Tonight. I said it when we went live, but yes, sometimes there's a bit of buffering that goes on. Theodore Sharp. Hey, I'm glad I sound good. Well, okay. The reactions are that this new mic was a worthwhile investment, so that's good to hear. Given that this is live streaming and I'm not doing very much, actually the sound is kind of important, and I figured I've been doing this for long enough now, I might as well get a proper mic. So, okay, cool, I'm looking forward to playing this back and checking it out. Let's see who is in the comments. I'm looking for where the mouse is. Where is the mouse? It's buried over here. Ah, here it is. I couldn't see it behind the enormous mic I am now using. So yes, who is in the the J-Vlog? It is really good, but it will pick up everything, even in unidirectional mode. Well, actually, here's an experiment. Background noise. Yeah, it's picking up the ambient fan noise. I can see the thing there. Well, I know I could probably correct that with an EQ as well, but still, yeah, pretty good. Let's see who's in the comments here. Good to see Razel Gul. As always, let the games begin. You're early again, but still good to have you there in the comments. We've got the J-Vlog. Hey, we've got Quint Ranked. Hello, everybody. We've got the, I already said the J-Vlog. Olivia D, good to see you. Don't forget the second launch button. Indeed, I was very careful about this week. A new adventure every week. Today, I actually had to change the settings to get the mic properly prioritized as the proper mic, so that was an adventure. Mr. Cordy Chap, good to see you as always. We've got who else? We've got Tokyo 503. Awesome to see you. By the way, and as always, if you are in the comments, even if you're just lurking, like if you're watching live, say hello. It's nice for me to see the names there, especially if it's a new name. It's always kind of exciting. Who else we got in here? We have Yasa. Excellent to see you. Yes, door is closed. Thank you for checking. Best to my knowledge, JMac217 said thank you before for recognizing the good sound. Very glad to see that. We've got Will, good to see you. Nick F, welcome. Good to have you in the comments. Who else we got? Sergeant Bilko, awesome to see you. Odie Jr., good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We've got Christopher Luke, who's asking, Hiko, how many kanji did I learn before I went bald? Asking for a friend. Yeah, well, actually, this directly correlates to the kanji that I was learning. Pretty much. This was level 1. This was when I passed level 1. This happened. I was still getting by with a full head of hair at level 2. So yeah, you can go pretty much up to NLPT. Well, the old level 2, which is like 2.5 now under the current scale. So I'd say you're probably going to start thinning at about NLPT2, and you might as well just abandon all hope at NLPT1. I hope that helps. A bit of encouragement. We've got Remino. Good to see you, Remino. Actually, I follow Remino on Facebook. You're a familiar name, and I recognize your posts. I don't see you in here very often, so awesome to have you here in the comments. Who else is in here? King Bilby, good evening to you. Christopher Luke was worried, but no, believe me, it's actually one. We live in an age where it's okay. I'm not uncomfortable at all with this, and believe me, it all gets better after that. Your Yeti is about 60 centimeters away. Well, I'm speaking close, and we'll see. There's a gain button on the back here, which it's kind of funny. I can see the settings. I've got it unidirectional at the moment, but yes, I can. As you can see, I can adjust the gain if I need to turn it down. If it's maxing out, tell me if I need to turn it up. I guess today's kind of a sound test. I'm looking at the thing here, the EQ over here. I am getting up to red, so let me know if it's sounding bad. But yes, indeed, that is how it goes. Remember, as always, if you would like, especially tonight, there's not a lot of topics. If there's anything you'd like to ask, anything you'd like me to talk about, just anything you'd like to draw my attention, if you at Mark Hiko Simon in the comments, it will pop up orange to me in the comments over here. And Theodore Sharp, I'm sorry, somehow I missed. And Perk. Actually, I'm seeing names I didn't call before. Somehow I skipped over them. Perk, awesome to see you. Theodore Sharp, excellent to see you, and welcome to the comments. And for everyone, if you come in, please say hello. It's awesome to see just who is here watching. And two, if you want to get my attention, even just to say hello, to ask a question, to request a topic, anything, I will see it if you do there's a better chance I'll see it if you do at Mark Hiko Simon. It'll come up orange. So please do that. And if we've got some time at the end of the show, I would like to do a bit of a Mark Rebier if I can. So we'll see how we get it on that. Anyway, I would like to make a track. I haven't actually made any tracks like for 2 weeks now. I have seen members of the Tokyo Digital crew. I have been pumping out tracks actually lately, especially good to see Ben Duncan making music again. Mata Gaijin Cup as well has also been doing some pretty awesome tracks. And of course, Sunny IL has been making tracks like every day as he continues to do. And yes, indeed, Steve from Berkeley, you've heard those words before. Not a lot of topics. We know how this goes, but still, let's see what happens. So, boom, let's get into it. So first of all, again, it's not exactly clear how this will go. The situation in Japan, as in most countries right now, is that there is basically there are no commercial flights flying still. I don't know if they're resuming any yet, but I think basically, all the regular flights, other than like charter flights, which and this has been a bit of a controversy as well. There are limited charter flights to repatriate Japanese citizens to Japan. However, they will not allow, even those Japanese who get repatriated, they have to be quarantined for 2 weeks either in or near the airports. And there are very few coming in at this point. However, you are not allowed to re-enter the country, even if you're a permanent resident like myself. Only Japanese citizens are allowed to re-enter, which has caused some disquiet, some change.org petitions. I think, it seems kind of mindless to distinguish between people here on temporary visas or temporary permits and people who are living here permanently. That this is the place that you would come back to. So there's been a thing going around about that, but at the moment there's not a lot of people allowed freely in. Hey, Andrea Moboy, good to see you. And yes, so that is a thing. However, Japan is considering now, when they start reopening flights, the first 4 countries that they're going to open those countries to, and it's good news for me. One is Thailand, one is Vietnam, one is Australia, and one is New Zealand. My dad actually just moved from Thailand back to New Zealand, and that's kind of cool. It's good to have a connection back to New Zealand again. I saw the new house today. I'm hoping I'll be able to, I'm hoping we get fiber up to the house at some point. So I'll have a decent internet connection, but I'll be looking forward to the chance to take a video and show you Kerikeri in the north of New Zealand, where my first time in 20 years I've had a connection to New Zealand. In fact, I was the one who turned the lights out. So actually it's 22 years since I've had a connection to New Zealand, and that was myself. Any of my family members there. So I'm really looking forward to that. Sorry, I'm just clicking to approve all the messages. I don't know why YouTube holds for review all of the emoji comments, but yes. Ahmed Usul, fantastic to see you, and yes, the sound is better, so glad you noticed that. So anyway, the 4 countries, it was super interesting actually, because the government is actually kind of quietly helping Japanese companies relocate from China to Vietnam and Thailand right now. Apart from the fact that Thailand and Vietnam have done really, really well with managing COVID-19, it is also kind of, there's an expression, China risk, political safety and everything else. There's a lot of companies that are kind of looking to move their China operations at the moment to these countries. So that's probably, as well as the fact that they've done very well. New Zealand and Australia probably included, just because, well, apart from the fact that they're popular destinations for Japanese to go to, they've just done extraordinarily well, it seems, with in the case of New Zealand, although also with Australia, with pretty tough lockdowns that have gotten results. They've gotten, down to pretty much no cases. That's interesting. Just because Japan will allow New Zealanders to travel to Japan, I'm not sure if I was in New Zealand that I would allow Japanese into New Zealand. Fact is, in New Zealand, it is maybe possible to test the whole population and to, actually eradicate the disease. They're pretty close to it, even with asymptomatic cases. Again, the tracing is very thorough and everything there. I think in Japan, while it's you could say actually they've gotten it very well under control, I don't think the strategy here is to get rid of the disease. I don't think they think that they can, even though we have had it at times down to 5 or 6 cases in a prefecture of 14 million people in Tokyo. So we're doing okay. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'd let them in. By the way, lots of new comments, just seeing if there's anyone else who's popped into the comments. A lot of people messaging me as well. So we've got Olivia D, made it through the other day, needed a special visa application. Well, that's great. Oh, so you got into Japan. Well, it's also good that they are making, and I've heard that they are allowing special cases and exceptions. Not around work from what I hear, but anyway, that's excellent that you're able to get back in. And, I think it's probably getting back to normal slowly. Andrea says it's a long weekend in Melbourne. And is heading to New Zealand in September for your auntie's 90th birthday. Can you get into New Zealand right now? I guess in September it'll hopefully be a little bit different. Try not to tap the desk. It picks up pretty harshly. Is that happening right now? I've got it on a boom and on an isolating thing, if you have a look, which is intended to minimize those noise. So if I tap on the desk, also it's connected to not the desk that I'm on. So hopefully, tell me if that, let's have a look. It's there, but actually, it's not too bad. Not too bad. But thank you for the tips to the JVlog. If you've got any others, I welcome them. Renewed your passport. Current one expires November. Okay, well, and expensive passports there in Australia. So anyway, good news from my perspective, and apparently the Japanese government is interested in joining the Trans-Tasman bubble. Again, I'm not sure if Japan can really get into that bubble because I'm not sure if we meet the same standards that Australia and New Zealand have here. But there again, if you exclude Tokyo, which is impossible to do with Japan, but if you do, Japan's doing a pretty good job. Outside of the main cities, again, Iwate hasn't had a single case, so we are doing pretty well. But there you go. When we talk about bracing for a second wave, this was from a few days ago. The situation is, of course, that it is kind of hitting, and it's hitting the way that I thought it would hit, which is basically that you've got a country where culturally going to host and hostess bars, paying people for company. And it's kind of funny. I don't know. Again, I've only ever lived in Japan, and maybe there's a world that, well, the problem with New Zealand is that everybody knows everybody. So, maybe in America they have this sort of thing, but basically in Japan, I hesitate to say the word, I'd call it adult entertainment industry, which makes it sound like porn or, brothels and whatnot. And yes, in Japan, of course, you have those, but there's a huge, huge spectrum of entertainment that you'll pay for drinks in a snack bar where you literally have an old lady just talk to you and keep you company and laugh at your jokes. Then you've got a kabakura or a host bar where you'll have somebody young, again, who'll just laugh at your jokes and pay you, pour you expensive, overpriced, watered down drinks. To all the spectrum through which where you start to have limited physical contact to full physical contact, like all the way through in terms of these things that are open. And it was a thing I never really understood it. It was kind of exciting when I first went to a hostess bar, like when I'd go surfing with my surfing friends, and no one was particularly rich or anything like that. But we were in Kashiwa, and this is something that sometimes the guys that I was with, after we'd come back from surfing, we'd go to a hostess bar. And, you pay $40 and some, this is in the far suburbs, so that, they're generally, if they were really, really expert, conversationalists and model good looks, they'll end up in the expensive places in, Ginza or Roppongi or whatever. And so we were out in the far suburbs. But yeah, you get a girl who would keep you company and pour you drinks and chat with you and whatever. And these guys would do that. And I didn't get it because the drinks were like watered down and horrible. The girls weren't usually, well, sometimes it was kind of fun, but the whole, you couldn't, well, you could sometimes pick people up. In fact, now that I think about it, I know people who have married people that they've met in hostess bars. But, generally speaking, it's for the illusion of picking someone up. It's basically like being able to pretend like you've picked someone up without the effort. It's already there from the beginning. And at the end of the night, you can just go home and not, and feel like you've had a good night out without having had the trouble of having to look for somebody, from the other sex, from the opposite sex to keep you company. And it was kind of fun as a novelty, but honestly, it's not the sort of thing I'd ever do on my own or suggest doing. It was okay to be taken out a couple of times, but I started to realize, man, if we just bought some drinks and went home, we could get through this whole night on like $20, and instead I'm spending like $100, for crappy drinks and honestly not such great conversation. So I never really saw the point of it. But look, when you've got a culture where this is quite normalized and a lot of people do this, both it's normal for students and whatever to work in this as hosts and hostesses, and that people do this as a substitute often for they're too busy with their studies or too busy with their jobs, and they figure that if they need that human contact and conversations, they can go to a hostess bar or host bar once a week and get their kind of which isn't the same as going to a brothel or sexual services. It's just for the company, and people can do that and they're okay. But so this is the thing. Everyone, particularly people who live alone, have been in rooms in Tokyo for 2 or 3 months. A lot of them have been, if you've been doing it correctly, you've been in isolation. And all of these bars have been closed. And there's 2 problems that have happened. One, you've got a lot of lazy people who miss human company, and their only human company is the type of company that they were paying for, which isn't what it sounds like in a New Zealand context. It's actually people who are paying for literally just someone to talk to. And then on the other hand, you've got the fact that politically it was sort of for all the different industries and jobs types that were getting subsidized and compensation for loss of income. It was deemed kind of inappropriate to be giving money to host bars and hostess bars, and because partly, in the whole chain which goes up from there of sexual services. And so they weren't given any, economic safety net for this, like other industries that were affected by this were, like restaurants, for example, or small businesses. So now we're in this quasi-opening up phase. What's happened? Of course, all of the host and hostess bars have opened up, and everyone's gone to work. And all the people who haven't talked to anyone, for a few months, have gone back to their favorite host and hostess bars. They've had these parties by all accounts, and there have been a large number of cases from Kabukicho, from the main red light district near Shinjuku. Interestingly, I would say just anecdotally that probably the ratio of host bars to hostess bars, like bars for women to go to talk to men who will pour their drinks and laugh at their jokes, there's probably one host bar for every 10 or probably 20 or even 100 hostess bars. So I really expected that we would start to read in the news about the hostess bars being the problem first, but actually the first real clusters that we've had in the red light district in Shinjuku have come from a host bar, where it was the hosts were passing around glasses of champagne to all their sugar mamas, and everybody who drank champagne from the same glass that was getting passed around all got COVID-19. So we are seeing, and basically now the government's saying, oh well, we have to make them, we have to take measures to discourage people going there or to make them stop. And again, these businesses are saying, these people who are working at these places have had no income and no compensation. The businesses themselves have no compensation. You're not going to, you don't want to pay to keep these places closed. You're going to see these places, they have no choice but to open. And so now we're having this debate. And by the way, this is very similar to what happened in Korea, of course, where they had a significant cluster around a gay nightclub. I think in Itaewon or something like that. Maybe it was in Gangnam actually, but yes, where they had thousands of cases or at least thousands of traced cases coming from this, and of course, culturally and socially very sensitive as well coming from that. I think people have seen what's happened in Korea, and they are trying to be difficult, but at the same time, they are. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why I've got an itchy tip of my nose. Apologies. Yeah. So it's happening, and it's happening in Tokyo, and it's happening primarily around the red light districts, but not from what you'd think, not necessarily. I'm sure it's happening from, obviously, sex establishments as well, but the really high-profile cases are actually these host bars for entertaining, women who have enough money and free time and desire to pay for the company of men. So that's happening, and we are up to basically for 4 days in a row this week we had 20 cases. The math is Tokyo has a 14 million person population, which means that 20 cases per day on average equals 1 case per 100,000 population, which is the very upper end of what the government would allow, provided that the sources of the clusters are mainly known. That was considered tolerable for coming out of the state of emergency. The target for coming out of state of emergency, you recall, 0.5 per 100,000, which equates to 10 people per day. Tokyo has spent most of this week like around 25 to 30, so the number's gone from like 5 per day up to like 25 per day. Today was less. Today was like 14, but it's a weekend, so they don't do as many tests on Saturdays and Sundays. So yeah, we are getting ready. The government's kind of looking at what didn't work during the first phase, so there's a lot more preparations happening for testing for hospitals. They're introducing a similar contact tracing app, I believe, to the one in Singapore. So we're preparing for another. The government is treating it as a certainty. And as this article mentions as well, in Kitakyushu, a city in Fukuoka, they've already had this, and that's centered around the reopening schools that they were getting these cases. So good night, Andrea Moboya. Good night, everybody. Andrea Moboya is saying good night, everybody. The J-Vlog, kind of wrong. Looking and drinking with eye candy as a bunch of versus a bunch of blokes for the same price. Well, yeah, and like I say, culturally I can explain it in the way that I experienced it 15 or 20 years ago, that it was... One, you don't all drink at home like you would in New Zealand. You go out, and you could all just go and hang out at a bar, and but you spend all day hanging out with each other, and it's basically drinking, but having a bunch of depending on how much you're willing to pay, good-looking girls to sit around and keep all of you company and pour your drinks while you unwind from a day's surfing or a day's whatever. Again, these hostess bars are often located close to the pachinko places, so someone who's won will go and spend their winnings on that. It's most often salarymen and whatnot, and I know what it is, and I don't judge people who use them, but I never really got the point of it very well myself. But yeah, this is a thing that is happening right now. So that is the thing. Also, with the second wave idea coming, and again, what people are learning, people in Tokyo really, and myself included, I haven't been on a train in more than 2 months, which is kind of remarkable. So yeah, I've just been in my home station. I'm being told to work from home until like October. So I am, currently. And that's working. That's a good deal. But truth is, even if I did go back to work sooner, I would probably choose to bicycle instead of going by train. The idea of being on trains, you've got those hand grips which people use, the doors, the seats, everything is quite crammed, the ventilation, the circulating the air. I mean, I believe that air conditioning is a risk for transmission. So a lot of people in Tokyo who feel like me have been trying to use bicycles, even though a lot of companies prohibit bicycles for commuting to work because they have to pay for the health insurance of the employees, which includes the commute. So if they have an accident on the commute, the health companies, they require that companies have rules not to allow bicycling, but a lot of people are doing it. I would like to bicycle myself, and again, Tokyo, by the way, is a fantastic, it's a good city geographically for cycling. Tokyo is very flat and it's very compact, so you'll actually be surprised if you ever get on a bicycle. You can get on a bicycle between like 3 or 4 stations away, probably faster than you would going to the train station, waiting for a train and getting on the train and coming up at the other end. In fact, you can get halfway across Tokyo, depending on how good the roads are, probably as fast at least. I mean, for me, it would take about an hour to get to work, probably a bit less than that, about 45 minutes. But it would be almost the same time it would take me by train. You have fresh air. The only thing is that there aren't very good cycling. There isn't good cycling infrastructure. You can generally ride on the footpaths, but the footpaths have to be above a certain width, which people don't normally follow. People don't generally have road bikes. They have the old-fashioned bikes in Japan, the mamachari. So yeah, it's kind of like if you're nervous on the road because anything can happen on the road and you're kind of vulnerable. On the footpath, you're not supposed to ride like you would on the road. You have to ride more slowly and you have to give way to pedestrians. But yeah, the idea isn't, there aren't very good cycle lanes anywhere, and there isn't really a good culture either way for cars giving way, making it safe for cyclists, or for on the footpaths either. There are limited places that will have short cycle lane areas, but then they disappear. So I don't know. I really hope that this becomes another opportunity. And there've been times that the idea of making Tokyo a more cycle friendly city have come up. I mean, if you think about it, when you think of the traffic jams, for example, they're often one person to a car. You could fit a whole bunch of bicycles in the same space as one car. The problem is, of course, that in Tokyo most people are not using cars. They're mostly on trains, and so you are adding to road traffic. But I think it'd be great if we could have some roads or entire car lanes dedicated, and somehow freed up so that cyclists could safely use them. This is a problem as well. Even if you have cycle lanes, cars park on them. Cars have to do turns, they have to cross them and whatnot, so you still have danger if you're cycling. But it is a great city to cycle in, and yeah, it's a great way to get around. So it's something I'll consider, but we'll see where we are in October. One city near Tokyo, in fact, I don't know what prefecture it's in, but Yamato City is passing an ordinance to outlaw walking and using a smartphone at the same time. My interpretation of this when this news story came out was that let me just come back to the comments. I see a few people. Got Andrew saying good night. We've got the J-Vlog saying before kind of wrong, going out those test bars, and the J-Vlog down the bottom, something I've yet to see, mobility scooters. Curious about that. The thing about mobility scooters, I don't know this for certain, but I do know that, for example, the reason you don't have Segways here, apart from the fact that you look like a dumbass on one, but also the same reason that you never got the hoverboards in Japan, motorized, or that you don't have the same electric bicycles like in China. There is a rule that even for electric motors, electric motorized wheeled transportation that people ride on, so i.e. not a remote control car, all have to be registered as cars in Japan, and you can't drive them without a car license. So there was this problem that for the Segway, for example, it's illegal to run on the footpaths here. It has to go on the roads, and you need a road permit for it, and then they have to comply with the road vehicle standards, which of course Segways don't. Same with the hoverboards. I suspect, and now that I think about it, they're super rare. I have seen mobility scooters. I don't know if that's the right word. I've seen wheelchairs that are motorized, but they are super rare, and I suspect it's got something to do with the rules around that. This is why the bicycles in Japan that have motorized assisted pedaling, they don't actually power the propulsion of the bike. They just make it easier for you to pedal up hills, and it's specifically because of these rules that if the bike could ever power itself, you'd have to be treated as a motorcycle. I think the mobility scooters have something to do with that. Hey, Mogberry Pie, good to see you. So yeah, coming back, my reaction to the story of Yamato City regulating people who are walking around looking at smartphones, something of which I must admit I am definitely guilty of doing, is this is another case of elderly regulating young people. This is another case of elderly seeing young people doing things that they don't do and being annoyed and passing laws, remembering that most of the city councils in Japan are full of people who are 80 years old. That's part of it. As soon as I put in that kind of elderly regulating the young, and that Japan is continuing to turn into an Asian version of the movie Footloose, some people did point out that people looking at their phones, for example, bumping into disabled people or elderly people and knocking them over by accident, but kind of negligently because they're not looking where they're going, are themselves a safety hazard to other people. And shouldn't take that too lightly. And I suppose that there is a point there that some people also pointed out, well, if they want to regulate it while walking, first they should regulate it while driving. Again, in Tokyo, we don't really see too many driving things, but I do hear a lot of people complaining that it is really common in Japan to see people, on their phones while driving and not paying attention. Of course, there are all those accidents from Pokemon Go being used by people while driving. There was this law. It looks like the city council is going to pass this ordinance. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with this. Like, for example, when the rumored Apple glasses come out next year, by the sounds of it, but they're kind of exciting. They'll look like these by accounts, and they won't have a camera on them, but they will project a screen, that you'll be able to see, like a heads-up display. That might be a good solution for this problem. I'm probably going to buy them right away if that's what they are. Again, I still feel a bit like there's an element here. It's a bit like the Kagawa video game ordinance that young people are not allowed to play video games for more than an hour a day, which is currently being challenged as unconstitutional. It looks like elderly people regulating behavior that they don't do, that they just aren't comfortable with because young people do it. I guess there is some merit to the idea that negligently bumping into somebody or causing someone harm while on the phone, you probably should be extra. Okay, that's kind of negligent doing this, like walking around with your eyes closed. That's a thing that's happening. I mentioned before about the host party. There was another case as well. Again, right after the bars were able to open again, 34 people went to a birthday party, mostly in their 20s and 30s, and that turned into a COVID-19 cluster. So again, obviously anywhere this should be common sense, but I kind of get it. Again, people have been cooped up for a long time. And people are taking the reopening as an opportunity to go and see their friends and have parties and stuff again. But again, this is what can happen. I think it's great to catch up. I would actually love to catch up. I haven't caught up with any friends in person actually since I was last at work. 2.5 months. I mean, obviously, other than I've just been at home the whole time. So I get it, particularly if you're on your own, to want to catch up with people. Probably the right way to catch up with people is one-on-one, not to have a huge party. At least not for a bit longer, because this is how the second wave arrives. One thing that I did, Renko, why not just make bumping someone illegal? Well, when you live in a place like Tokyo, bumping someone happens like every day. When you're on a train packed like sardines, you can't avoid contact with people. So I don't think you can quite just making bumping alone, that's an unavoidable thing. But I think where you're not even the thing is, you do bump in Tokyo, but you bump looking where you're going and trying to mitigate your bump, right? People will try to show a little bit of consideration to one another. There are videos, for example, of people deliberately walking through crowds and deliberately crashing into people, and to me that's assault. That's physically making contact with someone in anger and the intention of causing harm. That's the definition of assault, the intention and the act. Day-to-day incidental bumping would not be assault, but then you've got the situation where what if it was so negligent that it was foreseeable that you were going to cause harm and you didn't care, which I think arguably walking around with your eyes closed, it would be the same, could be treated as the same as doing it on purpose. I think that's where the idea comes from. Some people mention as well the idea of using GPS and how GPS is essential, but there again, I don't know that people would actually sacrifice looking where they're walking to follow a GPS. Then you have other problems. But again, this is why I like the idea of glasses that actually have heads-up displays that you can see through for that sort of a thing. Anyway, this news story, it's kind of funny. I was kind of quasi-joking and not really joking that, Japan's been so wrapped up in, as every country has been wrapped up in the pandemic for the last few months, that a lot of the stories that I was really tiring of, the political, cultural, historical spats between Korea and Japan, for example, had kind of disappeared for a couple of months. And I was, as you know, I was sick of them. I was as sick of talking about Korea disputes as I was talking about the American president. But I must admit, now seeing these disputes flare up again in the last week, I'm like, oh, it's good to have you guys back. I mean, it feels normal again. Korea's angry. They're confiscating assets and they're suing Japan at the WTO. Yes, we're back to normal. Good to have you back. So yeah, when the WTO, when Korea announced that they were suing Japan and the World Trade Organization to reinstate their special status as the only country in Asia that can receive dual-use exportable weapons-grade chemicals for semiconductor production, that they're the only country that can do this without needing to go through export compliance checks in advance. They were a whitelisted country. Taiwan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, all these other countries would have to go through normal sort of checks, but Korea was whitelisted as a country that is presumed to be compliant. The problem is that they lost like 70% of the materials that were exported to Korea. They couldn't account for them, which put Japan as an exporter in a compliance issue position vis-a-vis the US. So Japan said, okay, you've got to go under the normal regime, and they didn't like that. And they are now suing Japan, saying that this amounts to sanctions against Korea. Japan's saying, no, we're just revoking your special status because you failed to live up to the trust that special status came with. However, the pretext to this is the other stuff that is also taking off again, which is the Korea basically, in Japan's eyes, breaching the 1965 treaty resolving personal claims for war-related work and claims and whatnot by allowing courts in South Korea to confiscate assets of Japanese companies to sell off and pay as compensation to Korean war laborers. And they've done that. They've just announced that they will be selling assets by August. So again, Korea's gone back to the old Japan bashing. And when the Japanese trade minister gave a statement about the WTO lawsuit, I was expecting him to say, "Oh, it's good to be back in old times," but he didn't. He just said it was extremely regrettable, which I thought he could have done a bit better at that. But there you go. So with the numbers going up again, the government hasn't gone as far as winding back the measures to allow bars and restaurants and so on to open up. But they have lit up the Tokyo government building and the Rainbow Bridge bright red. They're calling it Tokyo Alert. The idea is they're asking people to be more aware and more vigilant and careful about COVID-19. I don't know. The numbers have been continuing to go up, and remembering that these go back a couple of weeks, typically they sort of incubate for about 2 to 3 weeks before they pop up. So I don't know, making the bridge red now, when the numbers continue to go up, I suggested maybe they need to make the bridge redder. It doesn't really make sense. But yes, we are under a Tokyo alert. We do appear to be going into a second wave right now, which is, I was hoping that we'd get a bit of a lull for a little bit longer, but it's inevitable this was going to happen. But yeah, we do have red buildings, so that's a thing. This is kind of funny and sad. The Nikkei Shimbun was promoting a case. It was promoting there's a mainly senbei, like rice cracker snack company in Saitama that was sort of featured as a story where the boss decided to promote women to all the leadership positions there, including working mums, to sort of encourage the idea of that women to see it as a good place to work. And the company's been doing very well, and it was like they featured this as a company that's deliberately strategically promoting women and advancing women. And while on the one hand a lot of people started praising it, a lot of people suddenly started saying, why are we praising them for something that should be completely normal and unremarkable? And indeed, it's kind of sad that you have to praise this, but this is kind of how it starts. It's baby steps, and Japan is still a long way from this being normal. The Sanshu snack company, I did tweet the URL. They have an online shop for people who want to show them a bit of support. Again, it's kind of ridiculous, but this is the thing right now, with particularly with the working restrictions and people being furloughed. It's still women are not proportionally in, even where companies are hiring more women, they're often on contracts which are easy to terminate, and they are not in leadership positions. So you still don't have leadership that really understands or is able to change the workplace to make them more friendly for that. So yeah, that's a thing. Hey, Tai Nakamura, good to see you there in the comments. Marco Fernandez, good to see you. It's a good thing as long as it's not promoted just because of their gender. And I don't think anyone's saying that these people are being promoted just because of gender, but there was a conscious, including the president wants to, I think the problem is really the opposite in Japan, that people are not promoted in spite of, that women are not even seen as managers. They're seen as people who are in fixed roles, where they're never considered for management. And so obviously you wouldn't promote someone to be a manager who you thought couldn't do the job, but they've been very deliberate about sort of promoting this, and they're finding that it's, surprise, surprise, it's working quite well for them. The fact that it's working is also justifying the decision. The fact that this is a controversial and newsworthy case, that they're even allowing it, is strange, but yeah, that was a good story anyway. Oh yeah, I did a little bit. I saw someone from Japan Times was tweeting that they used this, or they tweeted this, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So it's where my followers on Twitter are. How do I make that go away? Let's tap that out. So this is where people who follow me on Twitter are, and this is just kind of interesting. So 22% of my followers are in the United States, 2.5% in Canada, not very many in South America, 0.6% in Brazil. So como vai to people in Brazil. In Africa, 0.3% in South Africa. Does anywhere else in Africa beat 0.3? No. 0.2% in Saudi Arabia. Again, 6.1% in UK. So I guess that makes sense because I am tweeting and speaking in English. Some people in Germany there. India 0.9%, so still not so much. Same as Indonesia, however. 46.4% are in Japan, 3.2% in Australia, and 0.7% in my home country of New Zealand. So, which I'm kind of comfortable. Honestly, the problem is if people know you in New Zealand, like everybody knows you, they'll connect the dots really soon. So I'm quite happy to not draw too much attention to myself in New Zealand. But yeah, it's kind of nice. I guess this is what I expect in terms of spread. But yeah, this is where people who follow me are. I just got a kick out of that, so I thought I'd share. Taro aso, as we like to say, aso by name and aso by nature. Sweden, yeah, 0.0001% from Portugal. Was that right? I missed that. Now I want to see Portugal. Yeah, where are people from tonight? Let me check. It wasn't 0.0 wait a minute. Maybe it really was. Portugal, 0.17%. So actually way more than Marco Fernandez thought that it was. No one in Mongolia. No one? Surely there'd be some sumo wrestler or something. It'd have to be white for it to be 0, so then that would be depressing. So it's not 0, although there were some countries. Mongol, 0.025%, which means there's probably somebody who accidentally followed me. I wonder where it would be. So yeah, a lot of countries in Africa. Let's see if there's any. So Moldova, where's the love? I've actually been. So right here in the corner of, that's Ukraine, over on the Black Sea side, on the so you've got basically Romania over here, and Moldova and Ukraine. That corner, this place here where these three things met, I've stood at that border. I actually, like, I have a grandfather who came from the town on the corner of that, and I've been there. So Moldova, where's the love? I've actually visited there. I guess they not digging it, but anyway. Bosnia, no one from Bosnia. Anyway, sorry. As you can see, I could look at this all day. Where else are people? Fuchu got censored there. No one in Belarus either. Well, I don't think anyone in Belarus is allowed to access Twitter. Who knows? Liam in Japan says, you're in Japan, but your account was registered in Scotland, so where do you show up? I don't know, but they're treating Scotland as a UK, so you could be in either, I suppose. Who knows? Anyway, kind of interesting. Sorry, got a little bit of a kick out of that. Taro Aso by name and by nature. The Deputy Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, Finance Minister of Japan. Interesting background. A wealthy magnate. His family is extremely wealthy, from a Catholic background in Kyushu, one of the very few Catholic or Christian members of the cabinet. Probably a fun guy to go actually have a drink with, but not a good guy to have, you know, speaking as a leader of the nation. You know, I remember when he was in opposition, he would come on TV shows. He was quite self-deprecating and he had a good sense of humor. And I thought this guy was a scumbag, but actually he seems like quite a fun guy to be around when he is unemployed, as he was. But now that he's back in the job, the problem is he's kind of back into his habits. I mean, he says what he thinks and what a lot of people think, but what you're not supposed to say. You know, basically like a racist uncle, you know. And he was talking in Parliament, I believe it was, where he was talking about how Japan's results are a positive reflection upon the mindo of the Japanese people. Now, mindo is an interesting word. It's got two characters. You can see it. It's that on the second row. It's the first word on the second row there. Mindo Hatsugen. Min means folk. It means people. It is used as a kanji both in words like jumin, which are residents, or kokumin, which are residents of the nation. It's also used in the word minzoku, which means ethnicity. So you could read it as simply being the folk, as in all the people, or it could be read as meaning the ethnic tribe, or you literally use like minzoku to describe a tribe, for example, or ethnic group. And do means level. It means degree. So, you know, you'd use it for temperature, but you'd also use it to describe ranking or level. So he said that, you know, the reason that Japan has done better than America and Europe in terms of COVID-19 cases comes down to the level of Japanese people being higher. And, you know, it's an interesting word, and it's really hard to translate. Some people sort of put it's because of Japan's, you know, culture or something like that. But you could translate it as being that the level, ethnic level, is higher. It comes off with a slightly racist ring, which he was called out upon. And when he was criticized by opposition lawmakers for suggesting, well, then the whole thing about, you know, why are opposition members offended at saying that the level of Japanese, you know, or people, which, by the way, it's like kokumin. Kokumin include me, technically, as a resident of the country. You know, well, apart from the fact that, one, you're just inviting disaster by bragging when we're not out of the woods on this whole thing. But he was criticized for sort of apparently preaching Japanese superiority. He said, hey, aren't Japanese allowed to be proud? It's a little bit like what you hear from Caucasian leaders in Western countries who are unapologetic about a bit of white pride. It's not clear that this is racial, and I actually think it's probably not. In spite of what you'd think and a lot of people assume, I really don't think, even the people who you assume are slightly ethnocentric, this guy as much as any, Japanese are not as ethno-nationalist as I think a lot of people think they are. It reminds me, there was a story this week of the TBS was using as a foreign commentator explaining the protests in America. They had a commentator who was an American who speaks Japanese, who turns out to be a white nationalist. I don't know where they had a white nationalist commenting on the where they dug that guy up, but there is a subcurrent, including of that Norwegian guy who did that mass murder. A lot of white supremacists and white nationalists seem to have this idea in their heads that Japan is a model ethno state that they want, you know, to have white versions of. And they say such ridiculous things. They say that Japan prohibits immigration and doesn't allow Muslims, and tries to protect, there's laws to protect the purity of the race. And I'm sure you can probably talk to a drunk 90-year-old, raging right-wing maniac who thinks these things and runs a karate dojo somewhere and convinces people that this is what Japan is like. But if you hear, look, I really think Japanese are not. In a way, the result of the homogeneity of Japan to some extent is that there is this complete blindness to the, which is an interesting contrast to places like Korea that are also relatively homogenous, but they actually do preach racial and ethnic pride, partly I guess because of the separation from North Korea and the opposition to Japan. But yeah, I don't interpret this as it sounds terrible. It sounds like we're classier. Japan are just a better class of people. It's a sort of thing that, you can feel a little bit quietly proud of how well Japan's doing, but one, you shouldn't invite disaster by saying it, and two, you can say it better ways. He said it the worst way possible. He said it about as well as he put on his mask there. Yeah, and this is the king of gaffes. So what can you do? But yeah, that was an interesting thing that happened. Another thing that happened a few days ago was Shigeru Yokota, the father of Megumi Yokota, died. This case you might be familiar. Hey, Mr. T. Mr. T. Love Mr. T. Honored to have you here in the comments. Good to have Jeremiah Kettner here as well as BTC Chiba. Good to have you there in the comments. And Bob Turner. Excellent. Lots of people actually seeing people drop in, so there you go. Yeah, so where to begin? Megumi Yokota, you're familiar with North Korea and the abduction issue, but the quick catch-up is, particularly in the 70s and early 80s, even to this day, North Korea, there was the situation in the 70s where, in the 60s and 70s when North Korea was nation building, there were a lot of Japanese during the war who were born in North Korea, or that with so many Koreans who had Japanese citizenship, Korea was part of Japan, not by their will, now is the consensus, but they were Japanese, and there were a lot of people after the war who were married to, intermarried, like when they separated and became Koreans and Japanese separate. There were a lot of people married to Koreans, and a lot of Japanese who were just born and had affection for the people of Korea and Korea. And when North Korea and South Korea were having this war, where North Korea, although, from a Western perspective, we look at the Korean War as a proxy war between America and the Allies in the South, and China and the Soviet Union in the North, backing these two Koreas to fight against each other, like East and West, sort of Germany kind of an image. The way that North Korea projected itself was that they were the truly independent Korean nation, and the South was a puppet state controlled, as a military dictatorship that was controlled by America. And this narrative, this perspective of things, remembering that Japan was occupied for 10 years after the war, and the Korean Civil War started during the Japan, or the roots of it came during the American occupation of Japan. And so you had a lot of socialists in Japan who felt like what the North Koreans were doing was they were starting an experiment, like a big kibbutz, like a big, they were starting an experiment with socialist politics, and and that was going to be free of Western and colonial domination, as the rest of Asia had been. And there were a lot of Japanese that traveled over to North Korea to support the movement there. There were also a lot of North Koreans who were left behind in Japan after World War II. And one of the proxies of this whole conflict in Korea happened domestically in Japan. You had the CIA and US-backed right-wing parties, including the LDP, and they were offset by the socialist and communist parties in Japan that were very popular and were very, very sympathetic to the North Korean government as a socialist government that was struggling against a US government that was opposed to all forms of socialism and was trying to stomp them out and was supporting them. And a lot of political parties in Japan, including the Socialist Party, not the Communist Party, interestingly, it was the Socialist Party, was actually affiliated with the Korean Workers' Party. They would send exchanges, engineers, help and information over there to help the North Koreans nation build. And there was a lot of sympathy for North Korea, as well as the fact that Japan had something like 400,000 or 500,000 North Korean citizens or people who were Koreans who were left behind in Japan or at the end of the war, who, when they had to choose North or South, they chose North, either for political sympathies or because that was where their hometowns were. So amidst all of this, in the 1970s, these stories started to come up about these missing Japanese. Again, there wasn't, where abductions were rare and there were all of these Japanese people going missing, there started to be rumors, and some happened by cases of people who were in North Korea sent out messages that people who had disappeared or had been assumed kidnapped or abducted were able to smuggle out messages saying, hey, I've been kidnapped and taken to North Korea, and the North Koreans are, please get the word out to the government and rescue me. And people started to become aware of this, like in the late 1970s and 80s. But the Japanese left and the Korean community in Japan thought this idea was preposterous, that this could be happening. The left, well, North Koreans themselves said, hey, if North Korea needs people who are like naturalized Japanese, if they need people to train their spies, we're here. You know, we always support. We go over to North Korea all the time. It's ridiculous that they would have to kidnap Japanese for any reason. And the political left in Japan, particularly the Socialist Party, treated the families of the abduction victims as either victims who have been manipulated, or themselves as right-wing activists who were simply trying to slander North Korea. And they were extremely hostile to the families of the abductees as being people who were making up a story to slander North Korea. And so, yeah, it wasn't until like 2006, I think it was, when Koizumi went over to North Korea, and the Kim Jong-il admitted that they had abducted like 20 or so Japanese, and they even had some of those abductees that they were returning. They said that all the rest were dead, but here are the live ones, and we'll allow them to go back and temporarily visit their families. That this came out, and when this came out, this was such a shock. It was a shock in the sense that all of a sudden it meant that particularly the Socialist Party, but certainly the left, who had been so critical of the abductee families, I mean, practically abusive towards them all this time as being right-wing plants, it turned out they had been right. And, you know, and these people who had been pretty horrible to these people, you know, again, the reason that the Socialist Party in Japan now polls less than 1% is because of this. It's because of how they looked when this happened. And bear in mind the fallout from this whole abduction thing. It wasn't just the collapse of the left in Japan, the far left. And bear in mind, you know, there are people like Naoto Kan, for example, who joined the Socialist Party when it was the sister party of the North Korean Workers' Party, and they were committed to help seeing the success of the paradise on earth that was North Korea, that, you know, a leader of that party in the 1980s and 90s proclaimed, you know. So these were people who certainly bet on the wrong horse, you could at least say. And so, yeah, the other repercussion was a lot of the North Koreans in Japan who were paying tithes and paying taxes and so on to North Korea, and supporting North Korean schools and North Korean political ideology here, they felt so betrayed by finding out about this, because it reflected the fact that the North Koreans didn't trust their own North Koreans in Japan to ask them to help with this sort of thing. It reflected that they were kind of, you know, they felt slighted as well. So a lot of North Koreans in Japan took Japanese citizenship. They naturalized after this, and they stopped paying tithes from pachinko money and other sort of businesses to North Korea. That really collapsed when all of this came out. So the earthquake that the North Korea admitting to the abductions caused in Japan was enormous. Of all of the different abduction cases that came up, and there were, I mean, all the stories are remarkable in their own different ways. The most tragic is the one of Megumi Yokota, a 13-year-old girl who was walking home. The story appears to be that she probably stumbled across North Korean agents who were in the process of landing or returning back to a spy boat off the coast of Japan. They were engaged. North Korea is assumed and known to be engaged in running synthetic drugs. They make most of the crystal meth that is in Japan. They produce really high quality, like minted super bills, counterfeit currency, Japanese and US currency, as well as various other things. It could have just been spy materials or whatever, but it seems that while she was walking home, she came across these spies who saw her, and so to protect themselves, they abducted her. They took her over to North Korea, and they decided to use her to train their spies on how to act like a Japanese person. But she was 13 years old. She was the youngest abductee that's known. She actually was kept in the same detention sort of compound with some of the other Japanese abductees, including Hitomi Soga, who was the released abductee, and they were friends. The story that the North Koreans gave was that she was basically incurably, upset, depressed the entire time. She married, she had a kid, but eventually they say that she committed suicide. However, the bones that they produced, claiming that they were Megumis, didn't match her DNA. By the test that the Japanese government did. So they're still asking for a full accounting of what happened and to return her. Her father has basically been campaigning for 47 years. He just passed away. And he's done this through abuse. Consistent denials for decades from North Korea, consistent abuse from within Japan, from people who felt like he was just trying to slander North Korea. yeah, one thing that came up on Twitter when I tweeted that this was again really sad, that he never had a full, was still never able to resolve this. And this is the thing, to this day, there are still believed to be a number of Japanese in North Korea who are alive and are still being detained by the North Korean government. Only a handful were released, and there was a kind of an assumed quid pro quo that North Korea was going to allow more to come out if Japan gave them an economic deal. Japan just said, no deal, give us all the abductees now, and North Korea said, hey, homie, don't play that, and they shut off the whole thing. Yeah, whenever this comes up, and this has always happened, again, particularly back, I was in Japan before the North Koreans came out about this, and whenever this would happen, one thing that would come up is foreign, particularly fathers. There is a problem with Japan, that Japan doesn't have a family law system with enforcement mechanisms, and it doesn't have a concept of joint custody of children in the case of a divorce. So there are basically the result of this is that if you are married to a Japanese spouse in Australia or America or Europe, and you have a joint custody order, but the Japanese spouse takes the child back to Japan in contravention of a custody order, which is abduction, that's kidnapping, and it's breaking the law, and you can actually go to jail for it. It is abduction by a parent, but it is abduction. If you abduct a child back to Japan, Japan would not recognize the joint custody rights of the other parent, because there's no concept of that in the family law system here. And also, Japan was not a member of a treaty called the Hague Convention on Parental Aspects of Child Abduction, which is a treaty signed by a number of nations to basically resolve cross-border custody disputes, to ensure that, if there's an order in America, that it's enforceable in Australia, or if there's an order in Australia and a parent takes a kid to America to try to get an advantage, the courts in America will agree that they'll follow the Australian ruling. So for a long time, international campaigners were saying that this was a problem of Japanese abducting for, in international marriages, you taking advantage of Japan's not being in this treaty to gain an advantage in custody disputes by snatching their kids and going back to Japan. That was really brought to a head a few years ago when there were a couple of cases of Americans who came and tried to kidnap their kids back and got caught. And the American embassy said this is, Japan's fault because it allows it to happen. And a lot of people are saying, hey, Japan not being a member of this child custody treaty is the same as North Korea abducting citizens. It's really not the same thing. In the end of the day, by the way, Japan did sign this treaty, but again, then the second problem came out, and people realized what the actual problem was, which is that even when Japan joins this treaty, there's no mechanism to enforce joint custody. The courts, the family courts in Japan, do not have enforcement mechanisms or penalties to enforce custody orders. So basically, which is to say, Japan doesn't have a family law system at all, and culturally, there's no concept of joint custody, which means that Japanese parents, more often fathers than mothers, but could be either one, are victims of this the same as foreign parents. And this is being challenged, and there was a court case recently to say that it was actually unconstitutional for the government not to have a family law system and that it needs to construct one. The case was struck down, but it was still the message was sent that this was something that the Japanese government needs to do. But again, and I'm very sympathetic to the parents who have had their children kidnapped by the other parent, and have lost contact with their kids. I mean, to me, that's one of the worst things I could imagine having happen. And I have that risk being here in Japan. It's not just a cross-border issue. You sign up for that when you get married in Japan. So I can imagine it affects the people who it affects terribly. And I imagine that when they see Japan complaining about North Korea abducting people, and particularly this case of Megumi Yokota, they'll say, hey, well, Japan's just as bad because it allows people to, have kids without joint custody. I reacted strongly to that comment when somebody said that on Twitter. I'm sympathetic to the cause, absolutely, and I have an interest in it, but I don't think it's the same to have one parent taking, a kid to, again, those kids will become 18. They'll become adults. They'll become free to go and, on their own volition to go and reconnect with which I know is something which often doesn't happen, and it can really be terrible for the kids and for the parents and whatnot. But it's different to being kidnapped by government agents and held in prison and forced to work as a slave laborer to train spies for the rest of your life. It is a different thing. Both are terrible things, but the idea of saying that Japan shouldn't be complaining about that because of this is it's not the same thing. They're both terrible, but you know, yeah. But that was a thing that came up when this discussion came up. I said I didn't have many topics and I'd have lots of free time, and I had the keyboard ready tonight, but I'm 10 minutes over and we still have stories to go. I've been running. I've been trying to find a mask that I won't suffocate me when it gets wet from rain or sweat, and I found one that's got really thick, like wetsuit type material that stays away from my face and lets me breathe, so that's pretty good. And Yeti, I got that. I think this is like the last one, second to last one. Oh yeah, there's a new train station on the Hibiya line, Toranamon Hills, which I guess when I ride trains again, I may go and check out at some point. And that is the host bar where apparently they were playing a game, passing around a drink of champagne among all the people, and they all got COVID-19 from it. And that's all the stories from tonight. So yes, Japanese for Morons, the subtitling is impressive. Do you have the auto captions on? Is it subtitling me in real time? That would be interesting. I would like to check that out. That is all the topics for tonight. I am 10 minutes over. I hope the sound was good. Like I said, I got the new mic. I am kind of excited, and I'm looking forward to checking out the sound myself later on. Thank you to everyone who joined and everyone who left something in the comments. Good to see Victor. Good to see that you're here as well. And please remember to like if you liked. I apologize. I just had this, you get an itchy tip of your nose and you can't fix it. And I think just talking is causing vibrations that have just made my nose itchy, this whole thing. So I apologize. I've been touching my nose the whole time. Yes, anyway, it's a really interesting news topics as always. I'll keep you remember, you can follow me on Twitter. You can always discuss anything. You can follow all the news stories that I think are interesting as they come up during the week, as well as some of my views about them. Really appreciate everybody always coming in, and please like if you liked, and have a good week, everybody. Keep cool till after school. From Kentucky to Tokyo. Dang it, you always catch this. I always catch these things at the last. Well, from Kentucky to Tokyo. Please watch it recorded, and no, thank you for joining. Have a good night, everybody. Boom. Peace.